The 2022 NFL Draft was one of the weirder drafts we've seen in quite some time. It had some amazing players like Sauce Gardner and Aiden Hutchinson. However, there was also several terrible picks in this year's draft. So today, I want to talk about the 5 biggest mistakes of the 2022 NFL Draft. The way we're going to be doing this is we're going to be listing off the 5 players and then talking about what players that should have been taken with that pick. This should hopefully make sense as we go along with the video. Let's hop into the list. But at number 5, I have the Houston Texans taking Kenyon Green over some of the other offensive linemen on the board. Now, Kenyon Green, coming out of Texas A&M, was one of those players who was thought to be a versatile offensive lineman. He was somebody who we thought could play both the guard position or even the center position. And through his time in the NFL, he's only played a handful of games and has really struggled with injuries throughout the entirety of his career. However, even when he has played in the games, he hasn't really been all that productive. Yes, he is a young player who still has plenty of time to develop into the player that we think he can be, but as of right now, he has definitely been a massive mistake, especially when you look down the board and see the 2 offensive linemen taken at pick 24 and 25, who are 10 times better than what he's done thus far through their careers. Pick number 24 was Tyler Smith to the Dallas Cowboys, and pick number 25 was Tyler Linderbaum to the Baltimore Ravens. I know Tyler Smith was a bit of a reach for the Dallas Cowboys at that position, but given how good he's been, it's pretty obvious that he showed enough at his time in Tulsa. And then Tyler Linderbaum was somebody who was a very highly thought of center prospect, but only failed because the center position is not as valued as the guard or tackle spot. However, obviously, as we've seen throughout the rest of their careers, Tyler Linderbaum has ended up being one of the best centers in the league, and Tyler Smith is one of the best versatile tackles and guards in the NFL. Whereas Kenyon Green isn't even 100% a sure starter next year, as this Houston Texans offensive line is starting to get better, and Kenyon Green hasn't really put anything on tape to really keep his job secured. With this all being said though, Kenyon Green does have time on his hand. He's a very young prospect, and he still has that versatility, and I would like to see the Houston Texans utilize his versatility a little bit more this upcoming season. If it was me, I'd probably move Kenyon Green over to that center position. I know there's Juice Scruggs kind of already competing for that spot, but I would at least consider it. But next up, we gotta talk about Trevor Penning, another offensive lineman prospect, this time going to the New Orleans Saints with the pick number 19. This was always a weird pick in my opinion because I feel like everybody had a lesser grade on Trevor Penning than 90% of analysts out there. Trevor Penning was thought to be somebody who was a decent offensive tackle, but nowhere near a first-round pick. He struggled with penalties, holding, and poor footwork. However, the New Orleans Saints, I guess, saw the upside to him as a player and thought that they should go ahead and take him at pick number 19. And I understand the Saints needed a tackle prospect, and there really wasn't any tackle prospects on the board that were just amazing prospects. The only one that you could really make the case for was going to be, of course, Tyler Smith of the Dallas Cowboys, who did play tackle out of Tulsa. I kind of don't blame the Saints, however, in this situation because they didn't need an interior offensive lineman like a Tyler Linderbaum. They needed an offensive tackle, and going out there and getting a guy from Tulsa was a little bit less convincing when you have a guy like Trevor Penning who was super dominant at Northern Iowa. With that being said though, it's pretty obvious thus far through their careers that Trevor Penning has not panned out, and Tyler Smith is one of the best players in the NFL, as of course we've mentioned again with Kenyon Green as well. Trevor Penning is in a similar spot to Kenyon Green where he's not even a sure starter for next year, and I think unlike Kenyon Green, who I do think will get a starting spot next year, I don't even see a world where Trevor Penning gets a start this year. It seems more and more obvious that the Saints are going to have to take another tackle prospect in this upcoming draft class, and it's more than likely going to be a replacement for Trevor Penning. Trevor Penning has struggled with basically everything he struggled in college. He has terrible footwork, he struggles with temper, he has poor holding tendencies, he struggles basically with everything you want your offensive tackle to be. He's given up a ton of sacks and has very tested poorly in the PFF standards. Again, just like Kenyon Green, he's still a young player, but I think unlike Kenyon Green, I don't really see a path where Trevor Penning can be a quality tackle in the league. I will say, give him some more time and some more time to develop, and maybe he can pan out, but as of right now, it has not panned out in the slightest. But next up at number 3, we're going to talk about Lewis Cine going to the Minnesota Vikings with the last pick in the first round, pick number 32. Lewis Cine was seen as a pretty solid defensive back prospect coming out of Georgia, and of course, whenever you go to Georgia, there's always going to be expectations for you as a player. However, with that being said, Lewis Cine has just not panned out in the slightest. He's ended up having a ton of injuries in Minnesota, and even when he has been healthy, the Minnesota Vikings have opted to go in different directions. Thus far through his career, Lewis Cine has not even been a full-time starter at any point in his career, and when you look at some of the other defensive backs that were taken just a few picks after him, it definitely looks pretty suspect. You have guys like Kyler Gordon going to the Chicago Bears with pick number 39. You also have Jalen Petrie going to pick 37 to the Houston Texans. And then beyond that, there's a bunch of other really good prospects such as a Breece Hall at pick 36 who could have been a good replacement for Dalvin Cook at that time. There's also other good players like David Ojabo, Tyquan Thornton, Cam Jurgens, Trey McBride, all on the board still, whereas they decided to go with Lewis Cine. Now granted, at the time, Lewis Cine was seen as a pretty safe cornerback safety prospect, and I don't necessarily blame the Minnesota Vikings for taking him at pick 32. However, obviously hindsight is 2020, and this pick has definitely not worked out in the slightest. The Minnesota Vikings defense is still not that great. Granted, it got a lot better last year. However, with this Lewis Cine pick not working out, they've had to opt to different players to play those safety positions, and at this point, I don't even know if Lewis Cine's going to be on the roster come next year. Again, there's other prospects on the board such as Kyler Gordon or Jalen Petrie, who have been at least decent starters in the NFL. I know the second round of this draft isn't really filled with tons of amazing talented players, but there's at least enough guys on here who could definitely be starters over Lewis Cine. Again, Lewis Cine might not even be on the roster next year, whereas a ton of the second round guys and even third round guys are going to end up being very good players for their respective teams. I want to give a special shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is the easiest and fastest growing fantasy sports app available. I know the NFL season may be over, however, Underdog has plenty of ways to entertain us while we wait for the new season. You may not know this about me, but I am a massive NBA fan, and with Underdog's Pick'em games, I can earn some serious cash. Simply pick higher or lower on 2 to 5 player stats, and you'll have a chance to win up to 20 times your money in a single night. I personally love playing these Pick'em games on game day to spice up my afternoon. And all you have to do is use the link in the description below to sign up today using promo code MetroSports, and you can get your first deposit doubled up to $100 as well as an instant Pick'em special. Check the map on the screen right now to see if your state qualifies, and I want to give a massive thank you to Underdog for sponsoring today's video. But at number 2, we got to talk about Kaiir Elam going to the Buffalo Bills with pick number 23. Kind of a similar story here with Lewis Cine. He struggled a couple times with injuries, but when he's been on the field has been a pretty terrible player. Now, he's had a couple of decent moments here and there, coming down with 2 interceptions and doing a couple nice things for the Buffalo Bills. However, the Buffalo Bills defense needed a replacement for Tre'Davious White, and they expected Kaiir Elam to be that guy, and as of right now, he just hasn't gotten the playing time to really live up to that mantle. As it is today, with the Buffalo Bills having a worse secondary, he is listed as their backup at the cornerback position, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. Towards the back end of this first round, you can really see a lot of these busts kind of stand out, especially in the secondary. From pick 23 to pick 32, you had Kaiir Elam, Daxton Hill, and Lewis Cine all in the secondary, and none of them have really panned out to be these fantastic players. Granted, I do think Dax Hill does have some potential. And kind of a similar story here with Lewis Cine. None of the guys in the second round really are like 10 times better than these guys, but there is a couple guys who you would definitely prefer to have over a guy like a Kaiir Elam. Again, Kyler Gordon, Jalen Petrie. Down the board a little bit further, you can get Jaquan Brisker. And given the needs of this Buffalo Bills team, there was a bunch of really good players on the board, even outside of the cornerback position, such as the aforementioned Tyler Smith, Tyler Linderbaum, Jermaine Johnson II, George Karlaftis, Christian Watson, Arnold Ebiketie, Boy Mafe, Kenneth Walker, so on and so forth. There's a bunch of really good players that Buffalo really could have used, especially at that time. Now, again, similar to a lot of the players on this list, Kaiir Elam is a younger player and still has time to develop because the cornerback position is one of the harder positions to transition from college to the NFL level. However, thus far, we haven't really seen any signs of him being even a good player in this league, and it's going to be quite some time until we see him on the field again. But at number 1, we're going to talk about Evan Neal of the New York Giants going at pick number 7. Evan Neal has been pretty horrible, and I don't think there's any other way to put it than he's been horrible. Last year, he did suffer from some injuries, but before he got the injuries, he was playing just as bad as he was in his rookie year. Coming from Alabama, he was thought of to be a prospect that you just cannot miss. He's an offensive tackle who felt pretty safe, and given the other guys on the board, he was probably the safest offensive tackle prospect available. However, this first round was not really full of a ton of amazing offensive tackle players. The other guys were Ikem Ekwonu, who was taken the pick before, Charles Cross, who was taken at pick number 9, and then Kenyon Green at 15. And of course, looking at those guys, you would obviously prefer a guy like Charles Cross over Evan Neal. However, you can look at other position groups, such as the wide receiver position group, which is a massive need for the New York Giants both then and now. And you can see at pick number 8, Drake London was taken. Pick number 10, Garrett Wilson was taken. Pick number 11, Chris Olave was taken. And beyond that, you had other position groups like Kyle Hamilton available. Trent McDuffie was also available. All positions of need that this New York Giants team could have taken. Granted, again, I understand why they took Evan Neal because the offensive tackle room that they had was just horrible. But when you look at the wide receiving room of this draft, it was full of just amazing, talented players, and they decided to take one of the worst players in the entire draft. Evan Neal has been horrible, as I mentioned earlier. He's given up a ton of sacks, a ton of pressures, a ton of penalties, and it looks like his time for the New York Giants may be coming to an end if he doesn't have a productive 2024 season. Now, unlike a lot of these players on this list, I do believe that he will be the starting tackle for the New York Giants, but that's not necessarily because he's been good. good, but it's been more because they don't have any other options at that tackle position, and they probably want to take a different position in the draft than tackle. I think the Giants are going to try to ride this one out as long as possible, whether it's moving him inside as guard or keeping him out there as a tackle and seeing if it works out. If it was me and I was the New York Giants, I would also probably look at taking a receiver in this year's draft, such as a Malik Neighbors, for example, and trying to make Evan Neal work out at tackle. But if it does not work out, maybe you can move him into the interior offensive line. However, nothing has really been showcased from him that makes me think he could be even a decent player in the NFL level. But all in all, this year's draft, the 2022 draft, was full of a lot of horrible players taken at really odd positions. Your first #1 pick was Trayvon Walker, who still has potential, but obviously was nowhere near worth a first overall pick. You can also look at a ton of these position groups, such as the offensive lineman group, and that was a pretty horrible class. But all in all, there's a ton of mistakes, and if you guys want a part 2 to this 2022 class, hit the like and subscribe button. But I love you guys. Peace.